Good evening and welcome to Face to Face. For the Newsfirst team, I'm Saliya. They say justice delayed is justice denied. And in Sri Lanka, unfortunately, we seem to spend a long time waiting for justice, which sometimes never comes. We are just 2 days away from Easter Sunday, the 6th anniversary of one of the most horrific terror attacks in history, the Easter Sunday bombings. And we have been promised by the government that there will be some revelations, some explanations of what took place, who did what and why. But will the explanation be satisfactory? Has there been enough time for this government and its investigators to carry out these investigations? And do we need to investigate further? All these are questions which I'm going to put to my guest this evening, Mr. Saliya Pieris, President's Counsel and former President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Welcome, Saliya. Good to have you on the show again.
Thank you.
Right. So there's a lot of expectation that within the next couple of days we're going to be told what happened, who did what, and especially why, and who also aided and abetted in the cover-up. But in this entire eagerness, this rush to find out the truth, we need to follow a proper investigative process, don't we?
Yes. So my view is that it is important, whilst most certainly the victims of Easter Sunday, their families, they deserve to know the truth, and they deserve to be there should be accountability in the process. But nevertheless, I think it is important for us to remember that it is necessary to safeguard the integrity of the process, and because the entire investigation process is something where the public should be able to place the confidence in. They should trust the investigation process, and for that it is important that it be separated from politics, because any process which is perceived by members of the public to be politicized would not be trusted, because then one party or the other will say it is politicized, the investigation is not correct, or it has not been, there has been no proper investigation.
Then there's a cloud over the entire investigation.
So I think it is very important that the integrity of the process is safeguarded. And in that sense, we must be careful about not rushing things. And we know that there has been a long delay, 6 years down the line, and still there are doubts as to whether whether someone was behind it. If so, what was their motives? So all those are in the air. So I think it is important that the integrity of the process is protected, and it is absolutely important that all political parties ensure that politics, that these investigations are carried out and are allowed to be carried out independent of whatever politics that is there. Because if that does not happen, the integrity of the process, the ultimate outcome will be called into question.
Now, it's not just the victims' families and the Catholics in this country, but the entire nation which wants to know what happened and why. Because we were traumatized. Everyone was traumatized. Suddenly on a Sunday, the war has long been over, and suddenly these bombs go off, and in the most horrific fashion. And not just Sri Lankans, but people from so many countries also died because hotels were targeted. So this is something which the whole world really needs an explanation. Of course, the world is preoccupied with other matters now. However, those who were affected around the world certainly would be watching as well.
Of course. So I think immediately we talk about the victims and their families, but I think the broader community suffered. We know that as a result of these bombings, extremism, both from all the extremists from the other communities, also took advantage of this situation. And we know that one of the results was that the Muslim community suffered. They became victims of racism. Then on the so apart from the immediate victims of the bombings, the Christian community, which was the target, there were many others who suffered. And then of course we know that as a result of these bombings, the economy suffered. And as a nation, I think we were all affected by this. And so therefore we are all entitled to know the truth and entitled to ensure that justice is done.
Now, there's been a cloud over the investigation simply because we've had so many governments, including politicians whose names were connected through rumor or through other politicians making allegations, connected with the bombings and the bombers. And there's been so much conjecture over it. And whether an investigation, a proper investigation, was carried out at any particular point is still a matter for debate. It's a matter of debate among the public. The public has lost faith in the investigation, which brings us right back to your point that the integrity of the investigation has to be safeguarded.
Yes, so I think this is a common problem we have in relation to investigations of emblematic cases in Sri Lanka, where there is a loss of confidence in the investigators, i.e. the police, that there is a loss of confidence because in respect of these emblematic cases, there is always a perception that the investigations are not being done properly. And sometimes those perceptions, it's not just a perception.
It's actually true.
It is actually true
cases.
That there are cases where the investigations, where the investigators themselves are prejudiced. And they're sometimes prejudiced.
And they're influenced by the powers that be.
Influenced by the powers that be. And certain important witnesses are not, maybe the evidence is not taken. Or even if the evidence is taken, it is taken in such a way that the suspect accused is likely to go free. So that ultimately what happens, there is an indictment which is presented to court. But during the trial, the case collapses. So this is why we need to look at the whole process of our criminal investigation, especially in respect of emblematic cases, and ensure that there is a depoliticization, that politicians are prevented from interfering with the investigation. But of course, there is also the other side of it. The investigators themselves, we must be sure that they are persons of integrity. Because the other side of it is, even without political interference, if investigators are subject to other biases, then again there could be a problem. And also there is also this issue that investigators in general, there is a perception that they want to be always successful, and in that their zeal, sometimes they can be overzealous, and then again an investigation may not be impartial. So because we must also ensure that when criminal investigations are done, the investigators must be impartial. They must be willing to investigate all aspects. So often in cases we see that the investigators do not go in with an open mind. They are fixed on one theory, and they try to fit in their investigations to fit in that position.
But this is a lack of professionalism, isn't
That
it?
is.
Where I mean, it's lazy police work, which starts with your petty crime, which you go and report to the police, the local police station,
Yes.
and instead of properly investigating, they just ask you, well, who could it be, and you name somebody, and then they are fixed on that person.
They work backwards so that they then try. So we have had instances where the investigate, and that sort of biased investigation really does not do justice to the victims either, because the goal of the investigation must be to attain justice, not conviction of a particular party. Because there is Oxford professor who has said that conviction of an innocent person does not give justice to the victim. So we must be careful that whatever investigation, I'm not only talking of the Easter Sunday investigation, but everything else. I think the integrity of the process, impartial investigators are important, because on one hand you have people who are suspects. The other hand, sometimes an impartial investigation may be necessary to vindicate the rights of a suspect.
Now, you mentioned the word emblematic case, and this case has been one of the most emblematic in Sri Lankan history, and quite apart from the horrific nature of the crime, it was such a shock for the public to learn that so many people knew that an attack was going to happen, but did not feel that they needed to warn the public. For example, how many members of parliament went to church that Easter Sunday? To my knowledge, none. So, and of course later it transpired that the police had sent out a warning to the security chiefs of each member of parliament. So if the security chiefs knew, then surely the MPs were also told. Maybe they weren't aware of the full details, but 225 members of parliament had the opportunity to know this. And it wasn't just them. Then police stations knew about it, intelligence. I mean, the Indian intelligence had given so many warnings. And then who in government knew, who didn't know? It became a political game. Then President Maithripala Sirisena said he was not told. The Prime Minister at the time, Ranil Wickremesinghe, said he was not told. Then there was this, this amazing scenario where the Prime Minister said that he had been left out of the Security Council meetings, and it became something else rather than the proper investigation. But people deserve to know the background as well, don't they? I mean, who knew and didn't feel that the public should know?
Of course, there was the Supreme Court fundamental rights cases, the Easter Sunday cases, where the Supreme Court awarded damage or ordered the certain respondents, including the former president, to pay compensation.
Yes.
And that compensation has been channeled to the victim.
Yeah.
So in that judgment, the courts talk of the failure of the security apparatus, and of the going up, and attaches responsibility to several people: the IGP, the Secretary of Defense, as well as the president. So in that sense, I think we partly know. We know as to who has been remiss, But most certainly, as to what was behind it, why action was not taken, I don't think we still know the entirety of the truth. And I do not know whether we will ever know that, because during those Easter Sunday cases, I saw some of the evidence that was there, and we could see the certain WhatsApp messages which had been sent, WhatsApp messages from the DIG, who was in the head of the intelligence, and warned, saying that this is going to happen. And it is amazing that the public were not warned. And if this happened during the Easter, what we call the Easter Vigil, that is on the Saturday night, where even more people attend, and also where the church goes into darkness at a particular moment. If it happened during that time, perhaps the damage would have been even more. And warning to the heads of the churches, or warning to the public, or perhaps a declaration of curfew on that day, would have prevented people from these lives from being lost, people being maimed, families losing their loved ones. All this could have been avoided. So, of course, certainly we have had a presidential commission. The Supreme Court has gone into the matter. But I still think there are some things which we do not know. So, for instance, why the head of state, as to why action was not taken by the head of state. What was the communication between the head of state and the Secretary of Defense or the Inspector General of Police? Of course, we know now there is also a criminal matter which is proceeding. The former Inspector General of Police and the Secretary of Defense are facing indictments in the High Court, and they were acquitted, but the Supreme Court, sitting in appeal, set aside the acquittals and has directed that the trial proceed.
Absolutely. And there's so much cloak and dagger stuff around this case that it's not just about the bombers and who they were and how they got organized, but who knew about them, who helped them, who covered this whole thing up. I remember driving through Colombo that day, perhaps 8 hours after the bombing, and I didn't come across a single military checkpoint or police checkpoint. And I thought to myself, this is unreal. Why aren't the forces out there, with checkpoints, checking every vehicle, which, I mean, during the war, certainly the forces were very experienced in doing that kind of thing. So, who told them not to go out? That kind of thing, it boggles the mind. And all this needs to be answered. It's not simply about the act of bombing itself.
Yeah, that is so. But we must also my view is that we cannot go into an investigation with preconceived notions.
Yes.
We must be careful of that also. Because if we say this is what happened, and we say this is the truth, then there is nothing to be investigated. So we must be wary of that also. I think these investigations must be approached with an open mind. All plausible explanations looked at, and the different versions. We all know that sometimes the truth is not what it seems to be.
Yes.
And we often know in these things, sometimes the truth is something in between. Not version A, not version B, but version C might be the truth.
That's right.
So this is why we need these investigations to be set apart from politics. We need the investigations to be impartial. We need investigations to be done in a manner which creates public confidence across the board. And that is very difficult to do. In Sri Lanka, you'll always have a different viewpoint. There'll be one set who will say this is not true. There will also be the various conspiracy theories. So we must be, but I think that is why the independence, integrity, impartiality of the investigation process must be safeguarded.
But Saliya, this is so for any investigation, and here's the, we come back to the crux of the matter, that our justice system, and in particular our investigators, are not trusted by the public. Quite justifiably, there is a lack of faith, whether it's the CID or the TID or whatever, military intelligence, whoever it is. The public don't have much faith in them, and that's because of the glaring omissions in the past. So this is something that actually the government and the authorities, the police and so on, need to take cognizance of, and because how can you have a justice system where the public believes that it's all a sham?
So I think this is where I think for any institution, with the police or the courts, I think it's important that public confidence is paramount. Because and how do you achieve that public confidence? It is by ensuring that due process takes place, that those who are holding high office are impartial, are independent, that their integrity is well regarded, that they maintain their integrity. And I think those are things by which public confidence is enhanced. And I think the public also have reasons, as you said, for not to have confidence in the system. One is because there are so often we find that these investigations do not end up in failure, or they are not successful. Even where they are successful or so-called successful, and accused are brought to book, they are charged, then again there are instances where the evidence collapses in court. And so there are so many, and then of course the long delay in the process, in the investigation process as well as the court process, also adds to the public losing confidence. And the other side of it is, when members of the public lose confidence on criminal investigations, at least some of them will decide that they have to resort to other means to ensure justice is done. And that is the risk.
Yes.
That is also a risk.
And of course, you have the immense delays in court. I mean, you just mentioned to me before we started the show that you just finished a case which is nearly, more than 2 decades old. And this was an emblematic case itself. I mean, it made all the headlines back then, I think 2002. And you just finished the case. So, and my reaction was, my goodness, has it been so long?
Yes.
Because I remember the case very clearly. But then a whole generation has grown up who wouldn't even know about this, what that case was about, and so on. So how do you bring about justice when it takes so long? And we need to take a short commercial break here, but we'll get back to that particular point right after the break.
ඔබේ ගමේ නගරේ දේශපාලනයේ හෙට දවස සතිය දිනවල සවස 6:30ට.
If you do not perform, or if you have not performed, and if you do not perform, this is a protest vote we are going to place, and that signal, that protest vote will go down very well, because the government will know that their popularity is coming down and they will have to arrest him.
This government needs checks and balances.
You can't say only winning parties announce their candidates. There have been it has been time and time again where, candidates are chosen.
Our police is still being restructured and reformed at the moment, and that is part of the reason. But I also think organized crime is a bit unsettled at the moment.
Face the nation. every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m.
Welcome back to Face to Face. I am with Mr. Saliya Pieris, President's Counsel and former President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Saliya, we were discussing the dire need for reforms. And during last year's election campaigns, this was something that all the political parties promised, including the NPP. And since the NPP took office, there has been a process which has been put in place. Of course, it's slow. You can't, rewrite the laws very quickly. It takes some time, and it is happening. We see it happening. What's your opinion on the pace at which it is happening now?
Well, I think it is important for the present government to realize that there is a momentum, and they must, the reforms must take place while the government has that momentum. And that includes the PTA, the online safety, other law reforms, as well as the new constitution which has been promised. So if you wait for the second year, third year, fourth year, you will find that process will be stalled. We know that in any year that every elected government has a honeymoon period.
Yes.
And you have to do whatever you do during that period. That is absolutely important. So in that sense, I think these reforms, which was promised, must be implemented early. And I think there must be a concerted effort to bring in those reforms, because otherwise what would happen? Everything which a lot of people of this country fought for, strived to, and has been fighting for years, those would fail if the powers that be don't take advantage of the momentum of the popularity which they have.
Right, and we have seen a few steps. The Proceeds of Crime Act was passed, I think, last week. That's very important, and it is actually included in our IMF agreement that
Yes.
we should have such an act.
Yes.
And the process was actually started by the last regime.
Yes.
And now it has been completed. So that's one act. How important is that act?
Yeah, I think that is important because that looks for a way, when the entire criminal process and conviction-based criminal process takes place, it is years and it is more tedious. But this looks at a non-conviction-based procedure to take over assets which have been acquired through proceeds of crime. So, and these similar laws are there in other countries. But one thing we must be wary of, Sri Lanka has a lot of laws, but our problem has been in the implementation of the laws.
Or the selective implementation.
Yes. But I think the problem has been the slow implementation of many laws. So, for instance, relating to to disappearances of people, we had the Office on Missing Persons Act. But when you go to operationalize the law, it takes a long time. So, similarly, we must be now there was an Anti-Corruption Act which was passed 2 years ago.
Yes.
So
again, with much fanfare.
That's right. But in operationalizing it, how successful have we been? Of course, maybe it is too early. There's a new Director General who is in place, and I think we need to give them a little time. But the question is, the certain laws operationalizing has been woefully inadequate because there are bottlenecks at various points. So if you need to get new staff, there is difficulty because you have the Management Services Department which stands in the way. And people who sometimes do not really understand the needs of the institution deciding the recruitment and staff, so on. The institution, newly established institutions, it's a nightmare to operationalize. So the one thing we should be wary of these new laws also, if you don't get it right in operationalizing the law, 5 years down the line, we will say we had this law, but it was never properly implemented. That is one. Secondly, we must be wary about the abuse of these laws. Sri Lanka, we have had a history of laws being brought for a particular purpose, but being used for a different purpose.
I think both the PTA and the ICCPR
Act are classic examples. So, and that is where again you have the problem is with the law enforcement, where they use particular laws selectively. We have seen even the Money Laundering Act sometimes being used to harass people. So we must be careful that when there are new laws in place, that they are not used, that they are used for proper motives for which they were brought, to achieve the proper objectives, and not for ulterior purposes. And this is where again we come to the same thing, the integrity of the process, and to ensure that those who are part of implementing the process, that their integrity is maintained.
Right. And when these laws are weaponized by various politicians and regimes, the very name of that law tends to be traumatic. The ICCPR Act, which is supposed to protect people's rights, turned into an instrument of almost terror, because you could be locked up without bail by, under the ICCPR Act.
That's right.
And the same with the PTA. Prevention of terrorism, which means prevent acts of terror against the public, so safeguard the public. Instead, it was used to terrorize the public. I mean, these are just two examples. We had the Criminal Defamation Act, which was used against politicians, opposition politicians, journalists, and so on. Fortunately, that was repealed about 2 decades ago. But these acts often have enormous prison terms. I mean, I remember the Criminal Defamation Act had a term of 20 years rigorous imprisonment, I believe.
Criminal defamation had 2 years, but the PTA had certain sections for which 20 years. So Thisanagam was sentenced for that.
Exactly.
Under PTA. So the problem here is that when the PTA, for instance, there have not been adequate safeguards.
Yes.
And the judicial process, the judicial powers over the PTA are minimal. And again, of course, you also find that sometimes with the special laws, there is a tendency for courts also to approach these in a conservative manner. And sometimes we see that the rights of the citizen take as against the wishes of the state. Sometimes the rights of the citizen are not protected. So that is why it is important in implementing these laws that there must be a balance. There must be a balance between the requirement of the state, but also it is necessary for those implementing the laws to consider that the due process, that the due and fair process must be safeguarded. If you don't do that, these laws can be weaponized. And there is also a risk that corrupt investigators can use these laws for ulterior purposes, to victimize people for their own advantage. Maybe some corrupt investigators even for them to make money. These laws can be abused, and therefore that we need there must be safeguards in place.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the PTA, and the government has announced that it's taking steps to repeal it and possibly to replace it. Now many countries do have laws against terrorism, and unfortunately we have the PTA, which was supposed to be a temporary act, temporary provision, and it's been there since 1979. So we definitely need that out. But do we need something to replace it?
I think we need a anti-terrorism law, because also our obligations and the international conventions also, we need to have a law in place. And also for practical purposes, if there is such a conspiracy or acts of terrorism which have to be prevented, I think the general law, my view is that the penal code and the criminal procedure code provisions will not are not sufficient for the police, for the investigators to take immediate urgent steps. So I disagree with the school of thought of those who say that the general law is fine to deal with terrorism activity. But what I say is you need a special law, but you do need to have adequate safeguards.
Those safeguards should be through the courts.
Through the courts. So safeguards should be built into the law, and it must be through the courts of law, and not only to go for recourse to the higher courts like the appeal court or the Supreme Court, where not everyone has the wherewithal to go before the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, but at a lower level, to the magistrates, high court judges, there must be discretion given, and if judicial discretion, if it's wrongly exercised, the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court can overturn those decisions. But it is necessary that there must be safeguards. And also long periods of detention. One of the main problems with the PTA is a long period of administrative detention. 90 days, it can be at a time, can be extended up to 1 year. So that I think it is not right. There must be, at a particular point, there must be within a short space of about maybe 4 weeks or so, there must be a judicial review, a mechanism where a judge looks at the material and decides whether further detention is justified or not. Because we know that there is abuse of process which happens. Under the PTA, it was very common. There were confessions recorded when suspects never made a confession, but concocted confessions signed, and ASPs coming to court and saying they signed that the confession was made before them. I myself, I have cross-examined ASPs who claim that they recorded statements. In cross-examination, they have failed. So we need to have a due process in the counter-terrorism law.
Now, this business of detention orders, where the Secretary of Defense
or the
minister signs, that seems to be, very odd to me, to say the least, because here you have the minister or the Secretary of Defense who really don't have any knowledge of the case or the accused or anything. They are simply going by purported facts which are presented by the police, and they say, oh, okay, you want 90 days, fine, I'll sign. This is sort of like going to the Pradeshya Sabha and getting your PHI or technical officer to sign something. So it hasn't been exercised properly.
So actually, the Supreme Court, superior courts have said that when either the Secretary of Defense or the Minister of Defense issues a detention order, he must do it consciously. It cannot be a rubber stamp for the officials below him. But in practice, we know the presidents or ministers of defense or secretaries of defense are not going to study the brief and take a decision. So ideally, that sort of detention, I think, should be a judicial decision, where you can have perhaps a designated magistrate. A designated magistrate, maybe a senior magistrate like the Chief Magistrate of Colombo, who is authorized who is permitted to authorize the detention. So, from the security perspective, they are of the view that handing it to the judicial authorities will hamper investigations. So, perhaps you need a balance. Maybe administrative detention for a short period of time, then that detention to be reviewed by a judicial officer who can really go through the material and take a decision. So, there is an argument to say that if you have it give it to the magistrates all over the country, that power, that different magistrates might act differently. So then authorize, perhaps it's just like in bribery cases, they are all produced before the Magistrates Court of Colombo, suspects who are arrested in trap cases. So designate the Chief Magistrate of Colombo to decide on further detention of terrorist suspects.
I mean, I think the crux of the matter is that politicians and civil servants really don't have enough knowledge of justice, basically, to take these decisions.
That is
whereas judges from magistrate up to Supreme Court, they have that training, they have that experience, they deal with this every day.
That's right. And I think a trained magistrate, trained experienced magistrate will be better able to take a fair decision than a government official or a politician.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And also the investigators themselves have a different agenda. They actually they may be believing this is the suspect, the person responsible, and they could be wrong.
That's right. So we have in this we have a case called Mahanama Tilakaratna, where a High Court judge was arrested by the CID, and in that course of that, there's
quite a famous case,
fundamental rights case, and the Supreme Court refers to the words, they said, the sardonic pleasures of an opinionated investigator or prosecutor. So that that you must not fall, the courts, the judges also should not fall for the sardonic pleasures of an opinionated investigator or a prosecutor. So I think that is the standard. You must certainly a genuine investigation, yes, but we must be wary where investigators or prosecutors abuse the process sometimes for their own sardonic pleasure.
Now, all this brings us to, I think, the concept of a special public prosecutor, which has been mooted now. I've heard this term for over a year. Again, all the political parties promised it, and now the NPP, they have not ruled it out, but they haven't actually gone very far down that road. Of course, there are other pressing matters, but one of the biggest reasons, I think, for the delay is that it takes a while to set up an office like that in Sri Lanka. How should this be done, and do we have the expertise in this country to fulfill that role?
Yeah. So again, it is a policy decision which the government has to take whether they need office of an independent prosecutor. But conceptually, what is said is that the Attorney General, because he is the advisor to the government, should not handle criminal prosecution. So in England, you have the Crown Prosecution Service, which is independent of the office of the Attorney General. Of course, in England, the Attorney General is a cabinet minister, not an official.
Yeah.
So there, but it is important that the prosecution process be independent, be impartial, and we know that there have been, shall we say, allegations, or there have been perceptions that sometimes in certain matters that the Attorney General's department in criminal prosecutions has not acted fairly, and that is not in respect of one particular Attorney General, but over time there have been criticism.
Absolutely.
But what is important is, I think, to maintain the independence of the prosecutor. So whether it is an independent prosecutor or the Attorney General who is prosecuting, to ensure the independence, impartiality of the government prosecutor. Whether you have a prosecutor, DPP, under the Director of Public Prosecution under the Attorney General, or you have an independent office, if you have political interference with the so-called office of the independent prosecutor, then again you are back to square one. So, so what is important in this is for us to understand that it is not the name of the office, but the safeguarding of the process which is important. And unless we do that, we will, 5 years down the line, we will again see what are the success of the office of the independent prosecutor. Secondly, as I told you, Niresh, in Sri Lanka, setting up new institutions is a nightmare. And if a new law is passed, the new institution set up, starting from scratch, starting from recruitment, so on and so on, I can tell you it will be 5 years before that office is made operational.
But then you have to start at some point.
You have to start. But so this is why you must weigh. You must necessarily look at, do you want an entirely new office, or would you have to build in safeguards to the office of the Attorney General? But of course, this is not to say that I think there is valid criticism in respect of the prosecutions done by the Attorney General's Department also. There is valid criticism. But I think what is most important is to have a mechanism to ensure that the office of the prosecutor, whether it is part of the Aegis Department or not, that there is no political interference. And we must not allow the prosecutions to be dependent on the vagaries of politics. So when a government wins, suddenly prosecutions start and new investigations start, 10-year-old cases suddenly come up. That also cannot be. Then you must ask the officers who kept those files for 10 years, what were you doing all this time?
Absolutely.
So maintaining the integrity, independence of the office of the prosecutor, whether it is an independent prosecutor or the Attorney General as prosecutor, is, I think, what is important. Of course, also that all prosecutors are accountable. I think it is the Aegis Department traditionally never gave reasons for discharging suspects. But as of late, there has been a clamour that the Attorney General must give reasons.
Yeah.
And I think which is a good thing.
More transparency.
There's transparency. People must know what is the reasons behind any decision.
Right. I'm afraid we're almost out of time, but my final question to you, Saliya, is as the person who was heading the Bar Association during a crucial time in our history, the Aragalaya period, are you now hopeful that the justice system will actually move forward and be modernized and serve the people better in the near future?
Well, we are always optimistic that, and we always live in hope. And but I must say that in order to serve the people better, there are certain fundamentals which have to fall into place. And whether those fundamentals will fall into place, I do not know.
And I'm afraid we'll have to leave it at that. My thanks to Mr. Saliya Pieris, President's Counsel, for being with me this evening. And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.